Armistice was the original name for the day that we now call Veterans Day, and it should be coming up there directly. That one. Armistice means a temporary stopping of open acts of warfare by agreement between the opponents. It is a truce. It could be a ceasefire. It is not a peace agreement after a decisive victory, but simply an agreement to stop fighting. And so the armistice that took place 100 years ago today did not decide anything in the world situation, other than all of the parties of the war were tired, worn out, and couldn't carry on. It was a stalemate. People just kept dying. And so they agreed to disagree and stop the fighting. That was armistice. So when we talk about armistice, we have to recognize that although it ended the fighting at that time, there was nothing solved by it. All of the problems in the world were still festering. It's like you have pots on the stove, all of them simmering, the lids are rattling. All that was going on, and it blew up again, of course, we know, in the Second World War. But the word armistice, I want to rest here for just a moment, comes from the Latin word sistere, S-I-S-T-E-R-E, and it means to come to a stand. So armistice comes from Latin sistere, to come to a stand. It means they just stop moving, or to cause to stand or to stop. And it's combined with arma, which means weapons. So the weapons stopped. That's what the term armistice gives to us. And when we talk about this, the agreement between the Allied powers and those who were fighting against Germany, and the agreement with Germany, was to end all of the fighting, and they agreed that it would take place on the 11th day of November at the 11th hour in the 11th month. So the 11th hour, 11th day of the 11th month. And today, 100 years ago, that armistice agreement was signed. And so we are celebrating it today. President Woodrow Wilson issued the first Armistice Day Proclamation 1919. Yes, it shows up there. And then in 1938, Congress called for churches and schools to observe Armistice Day. That's kind of odd, because when he set it up in place, he called for the nation to remember those who had died in their country's service and set aside a day for America, and this is what he said exactly, to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the councils of the nations. And so they were looking for a way to provide peace and such throughout the world. We came up then next with the United Nations comes into existence, but there's all sorts of things that they were trying to do worldwide to have that kumbaya feeling and everybody stop fighting. Can't we just get along? Is kind of what they were hoping for around the world, only they were calling for it as the move not only in our nation, but around the globe. There was this desire to have peace. And here in 1919, then, with this proclamation, making it Armistice Day, it was also called Flag Day for a time, but making it Armistice Day, then they would look at this time and say, this is a time when the war has stopped. Let's just stop the wars from all future events. It didn't happen. In 1938, Congress called for churches to get involved too. They asked the churches and schools to observe this day, which seems weird today. We can't even say church in school today. You can't have Pledge of Allegiance in school today because you mentioned God, and you know all the stuff that's going on. But in that time frame, they did, and they asked that they would remember the day, remember those who had fought, remember why we still have freedom in our country, and cause this day to be celebrated within the schools. And if you remember, I know I do, that in grade schools and so on, clear through high school, we would have opening exercises every morning, Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer, and those things were said along with Bible readings many times. And so that's where our nation was founded, and that's what we have to come back to, in my humble opinion. In 1954, what had been called Armistice Day or Flag Day became Veterans Day by the act of Congress. And so they declared it a national holiday, a time to remember for veterans not only of First World War, but also of Second World War and any and all future wars. And so this morning we give thanks to those who have given of their time, many of them gave their lives, that we can still gather freely. Do you agree with all that? I mean, we couldn't be here if they had not fought for our freedoms. It wouldn't be happening. So in that change from 1954, calling it Veterans Day, it changed the purpose and scope from that which was originally set in place by Wilson. And I want to look at this just a moment. President Eisenhower then called on the nation to remember the sacrifices of all who fought in all of our nation's wars. And so it didn't become just a celebration of the ending of World War I, but it became a remembrance service for all veterans and all those who'd given their lives in our nation for all wars. And it's important that we remember that. And we are then to rededicate ourselves to pursuing peace. Now, how do we pursue the peace? How do we pursue peace? With one another, husbands and wives, neighbors, members of churches. How do we pursue peace? Doesn't it start with just one of us and then another of us? Because we can get along perfectly as long as there's nobody else in the room. I mean, seriously, I know it sounds funny, but, right? If I'm alone, I don't have any arguments. Do you? No. And so what we need to do is look how and figure how we can get along with other people, even though we may disagree at times. I heard, I think it was Jim Dement mentioned this morning that, was it Hannity you said? Did that thing after the election where the Democrats took the Congress, that the Republicans weren't out in the streets?
No, there was a bit how the Republicans reacted after realizing the Democrats won the House. Talking about was there anger in the streets, right? And it just showed a peaceful street with people walking up and down it. Well, what about the shopping malls where people uprising and it just showed people going about their daily business?
Are you hearing what he's saying? So in this, they did a thing on, I can't remember what show it was. Okay. Trying to break in the Supreme Court, and then opposed that with what the streets looked like when the Democrats won and the Republicans just went on about their business. We win at the polls as long as they're not stolen. Anyway, going on. Eisenhower called for the nation to remember all those who fought and died defending our nation and to celebrate all veterans of all wars. And I've said that a lot this morning, but it's important for us to remember that. We are free because of those who've shed their blood for us, beginning with Jesus the Christ. He has set us free from sin. Men and women throughout the years of this country have struggled and fought and given their lives that we can be free here. There are people who suggest that if we would only learn to get along, translated most often to meaning to give in, then peace would ensue. But we don't find peace by giving in. I heard it said during the run-up to the elections that there will be a return of civility in the nation once Democrats take control again, I think was the way it was said. Well, no, that's what Aboli says, right? Civility comes by the agreement of people who agree to be civil. And so we need to recognize that. Throughout man's history, there have been wars, rumors of wars. That's never changed. I don't know that it will ever change until Christ comes. The enemy of our souls has waged warfare against the Christian church and against God himself, against all creation since he first came to this earth. And when he began to rebel, he was thrown out of heaven. So there has always been that disagreement. 2 Chronicles tells us that when Judah was threatened by the people of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, that the Lord told Judah to stand still. Just stand still and see the salvation of their God. And so I would like us to remember this morning, the basis for this section of Scripture is that God is in control. All right? So 2 Chronicles 20, verses 9 through 17. If disaster comes upon us, sword, judgment, pestilence, or famine, we will stand before this temple and in your presence, for your name is in this temple, and cry out to you in our affliction, and you will hear and save. I want to stop there for a moment. We pray, and we have corporate prayer because we believe he's there, and he hears us here, and he answers us. Agreed? That's why we spend time in corporate prayer. Going on, verse 10. And now here are the people of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, whom you would not let Israel invade when they came out of the land of Egypt, but they turned from them and did not destroy them. Verse 11. Here they are, rewarding us by coming to throw us out of your possession, which you have given us to inherit. That's very important to recognize. The Lord did not let Israel go against those three nations. He said, just walk on by, ignore them. Go into the land that I'm giving you. And this says, rewarding us by coming to throw us out of your possession. God owns the world. He said that the part that was given to Abram and his descendants would be theirs forever, and it's his possession which God gave them to inherit. Verse 12, O our God, will you not judge them? For we have no power against this great multitude that is coming against us, nor do we know what to do, but our eyes are upon you. That verse 12, could be applied to the invading army coming against our southern border. It's not immigration. Immigrants don't march with the flags of their own nation and deride the people in the nation they want to enter. It's an invasion. So that could apply there. Verse 13. Now all Judah with their little ones, their wives, and their children stood before the Lord. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jeiel, the son of Mattaniah, a Levite of the sons of Asaph, in the midst of the assembly. So a prophet stood up. That's what that whole thing, all those names, a prophet stood up. Verse 15. And he said, Listen, all you of Judah, and you inhabitants of Jerusalem, and you, King Jehoshaphat. Thus says the Lord to you, do not be afraid nor dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow, verse 16, go down against them. They will surely come up by the ascent of Ziz, and you will find them at the end of the brook before the wilderness of Jeruel. You will not need to fight in this battle. Position yourselves, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord who is with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Do not fear or be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord is with you. Do not fear or be dismayed. That's what the Lord continues to tell us. And back up in verse 15, it says, do not be afraid nor dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. In our time, the battle is still God's. Do we believe that? Yeah. Are we a special or a chosen people? Yeah, we are chosen. And are we special unto God? Yes, we're set aside unto him. And he tells us that we didn't choose him, but he chose us. So yes, we're a chosen people. Can we count upon him to fight for us? I believe so. Yes. That's what we count on. And so right now there's a war raging across the globe in an all-out effort to bring people into agreement for a one-world government. They're trying to destroy nation states, trying to destroy national identities around the globe. The people in Germany are saying, many of them are fleeing Germany, in fact, of German heritage, are fleeing Germany because they're saying they don't recognize their homeland. They're not safe in their own streets. The numbers of crimes, I'll put it that way, the numbers of crimes against citizens of the nations where those of Muslim heritage have invaded, I guess is a way to put it, have settled, are phenomenal, but they're not reported because they don't want to make it look bad for those who have just joined their country. But they're not joining the country. They're coming as a way to take over the country. And so I don't know if that is their goal here. Only God knows that. But I do know that he is still the same God who fights on our behalf. And so whatever it may look like, we have to trust in him and recognize he is in control. And that's a very familiar message. I'm sure you've heard it frequently here. God is in control, right? We agree with that. Even though the wealthy and powerful of the earth continue with varying assaults to move people toward agreement that one world government is the best, it's not the case. God is in control of the world, not the people with money in their pockets. And I don't mean like a couple dollars or hundreds of dollars. I'm saying billions of dollars and trillions of dollars. Think Soros or Rothschilds, those folks who in prior wars would sell arms to both sides in a battle just to enrich themselves. Ridiculous. Israel and the United States in particular are the objects of ridicule, harassment, hatred, and loathing by those who desire to control the destinies of all the people in the world and to control the economies of the world. They hate us. And they hate us primarily because we believe in something greater than us. And it's not our government. I enjoy our government when it's working. I'm glad that we were born here. I really am. But I don't believe in my government. I believe in my God. And if there's ever a question of obeying God or obeying the government, I will obey God. If it goes against the government, so be it. That's where this man stands. But both Israel and the United States present major problems to the people of the world who want a one-world government because they are trying to destroy everyone who believes in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whether they be Jew or Christian. We are belittled and ridiculed across the globe. It's safe to make fun of Christians. You can stand there with blonde hair, blue eyes, and white skin and say that you're identifying as a black woman, and you have to be accepted. You can have your hair grow long and take drugs and such and transform yourself, they say, from a man to a woman and say that that's acceptable. But if we stand up and say we're Christian and we believe in Jesus the Christ as the only way to salvation and the only entrance into heaven, we are ridiculed? Oh, it ought not be. Our nation was established by people who sought freedom from religious persecution. They fled Europe because people were harassing them. Well, we've chosen here not to flee. We are in a land where God has given it to us. As Israel was given to the people of Jewish faith, I believe God gave us this land and brought us here. Personally, I don't know that you have to agree with me, but that's where I stand. And so when the time came for them to redress and seek remedy to all the problems they were having with King James, they fled England, and they fled Europe, and they came here. And after a time, they finally settled on the Declaration of Independence, where they outlined their grievances and said, these things we believe. And they tacked onto that, added to that as the preface, the Bill of Rights. And said these rights don't come from man, they don't come from government, nor can they be taken from us by government or by man. These things are inalienable, and they come to us from our Creator. And so this Bill of Rights, I am very thankful for, personally. So our founders, when they were together, figuring what to do in our nation, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to one another and to the nation that they sought to bring into existence. And we, this morning, in celebrating the veterans who have given of their time and their lives, that we could still be free, we recognize that they too pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor to defend this nation. We can't give up this nation unless God tells us to, but at this point I don't see that happening. We are still encouraged to get out and vote and fight for what we believe is right, and so we do. Only difference is, the major difference is, as Jim pointed out in that snippet that he gave me this morning, people who are of Christian faith, I believe, and perhaps some of the Israeli faith as well, the Jewish faith, they are not out tearing down buildings and burning up stores and so on if they don't get their way at the polling places. Nor do we, at least I'm praying so, nor do we go to polling places and submit ballots that weren't printed or weren't filled out by actual people. That's a whole other thing I'm coming to. But the people, the founders of our nation, believed that God had brought them here for a purpose. They believed that God had prospered their efforts, that He had kept them safe, and that He had given them wisdom to put in place documents which would guide our country for years. And they have. Those documents have served well. Other nations have modeled their documents after our own, if they've sought for freedoms. Well, the U.S. has been involved in many wars over its relatively short history. And spiritually, I believe more importantly, this nation has been blessed because of its willingness to send people all over the world to preach the gospel of Jesus the Christ. Now, we export a lot from America as to customs. Think Coca-Cola, think McDonald's, any of those things. But we are primarily known, have been primarily known for spreading the gospel in our earlier years as a nation. We need to come back to that. We have missionaries coming to our nation now from lands that we sent missionaries to, which I think is awesome. It's like having the kids grow up and give some advice to the parents. Sometimes it works. And if it's about Christ, I pray we listen. So here, the U.S. has been involved in many wars, yes, but more importantly for us as a nation, we have been involved in a spiritual battle of getting the message of Christ out to a lost and dying world. And we're hated for that by the archenemy of our soul, Satan, and all that he can muster around him. And so they fight continually. Our first institutions of higher learning, and we've said this before, I know you've heard it before, our first institutions of higher learning, the colleges and the universities, were formed not to make businessmen, but were formed to make ministers of the gospel, to carry the gospel message into our own country and across the seas. That's why they came into being. Our missionary agencies have always been at the forefront, always out there, first, sending people. Always. That's who we are as a people. I'm always frustrated when I hear on the television during a disaster like a hurricane or tornado or raging fires or whatever it is. I'm frustrated at the seeming perplexity of the newscasters who say, "Oh, I don't understand. Everybody's just out there helping everyone." Well, duh. That's who we are at the heart of our being as a nation. We are helpful toward one another. I mean, basically, we are good people. And yet we've had leaders who have told us that we're not a good people, that we need to apologize for everything that we are. Not so. Not so. When we're wrong, I believe we need to repent, but when we're right, we need to stand for that. Our first public schools were begun with the sole purpose of equipping the population with the skills necessary to avoid the snares of the old deluder called Satan. And that act was first called the Old Satan Deluder Act. In Congress, it was Old Satan Deluder Act. It was first in a state, but the purpose for public education was to teach children to be able to read the Bible so they wouldn't fall for the snares of the devil. Amazing. And now you can't even carry a Bible in most schools, public schools. And people wonder why our nation is becoming what it's becoming. Throughout our existence as a sovereign nation, we've had to be vigilant. We've had to remain on guard to care for the things we deeply believe in. And throughout this time, we've constantly had to be vigilant against those who would usurp our liberty as enumerated in the Bill of Rights. God's hand is visible, I believe, in all of our founding documents. Yet it is these founding documents that some in this country wish to denigrate and discard. Our Constitution is second to none. Our Bill of Rights is the envy of the world. Can any of you point to a picture or tell me of a person's name who has seen floods, thousands, hundreds, even tens of people fighting to get out of our nation because it's so horrible here? Anybody? It isn't the case. Everyone, everywhere, seems to want to come here. And it boggles my mind that when they get here, then they want to change it to what it was where they left. That's insane. And it should not happen. The freedom of speech, the right to bear arms are both wildly important to our continuing freedom as a God-fearing nation. One of the reasons we're still free is there's not a nation on earth that's willing to come over here so far and pick a fight with us on our own shore, because nearly everyone is armed. It's different if you go to France or to England, where you might have a knife fight up against somebody who's carrying automatic weapons. But here, very, very, very many people are armed, and some to the teeth. And so nations are hesitant to attack us. Also, more importantly than that, God has protected us. He has watched over us from the very outset. It's senseless to disarm our citizenry as a response to the crazy people who commit heinous crimes with guns. Increasing gun laws do not stop criminals. Agreed? Do you agree with that? I mean, we could pass 100 more laws in the state of Ohio, make it just like Chicago with all the laws against guns. How's that working out for Chicago? They're the murder capital of the country. So gun laws don't do it. Criminals do not read the no guns signs and then turn around for fear of breaking the law. They just don't do that. Oh, I can't carry my gun in there? They don't turn around and walk away. The fact that every person of wealth and fame who seeks to disarm citizens in our own country has by their side armed guards, again, boggles my mind. They want to strip us of our ability to protect ourselves and rely upon 911, which I've heard that when you need somebody in seconds because you're under attack, the police are only moments away. So that doesn't work, usually. I mean, they come, and I'm thankful for our police department. I truly am. But sometimes we have to stand for our own rights. We have to protect our own selves. And so in this, the same illogical preaching, or reasoning rather, is applied by those who say we must abolish our borders. And that makes as much sense to me as saying that no matter what key you have, you can come to our house and everything is yours. Now, you would all be welcome, of course, because we're members of the same family. But the people who are living on the streets or the people who are coming in through the southern border, they have no right to our homes. I wouldn't go to their homes and expect to just walk in and take what I wanted. And yet that's what it seems that the people who want to destroy our borders are saying. Well, does that make us terrible to believe in our nation? I'd say not. We have fought to protect this nation, and it should have borders which are protected. Again, those people who would take our guns have armed security forces. And those people who would open our borders live in gated communities behind armed security forces. Different. I saw a commercial not very long ago which said that if you really want to do away with ICE, and you want to do away with the border patrols, and you want to wipe out our borders and allow free access across the nation, then everyone who comes across the border must wait until one of you, who wants all that to happen, takes them to your home to have them live. So if you really believe that, do that. It's like Al Gore saying regarding the global warming mess. If he really believes that global warming is caused by jet planes and the excessive amount of carbon in the air caused by automobiles and such, then he shouldn't be jetting all over the world to these conferences. When you have 200 or 300 or sometimes 1,000 people show up to a destination at some point in the world, all by private jet, that doesn't make sense to me. If it's destroying our planet, teleconference, send a letter. You don't have to fly there. So just these things have been on my mind. And when it comes to the election process, it's always been gamed by those seeking power, yet God's promises are still true. He works all things together for the good of his people, and we believe that. The battle to maintain our precious liberties, the battle to maintain it, is fought often at the ballot box, and our freedom under God must be fought for in every generation, this one as well. Right now, the recent election is in danger of being defrauded because dead people are still voting, along with non-citizens. The joke about someone's relative having been dead for many years, but it hasn't stopped them from voting for the last 20. It's kind of humorous, but not really. If you look at the number of those that are still taking place, and the move to allow illegal aliens to vote in our election process is insane. We don't go down to the local market and invite 30 or 40 people in here on our day that we decide things for our church and ask them to vote in our election, do we? Where's the difference? We can't do it for the nation either. If you're not a member of an institution, if you're not, say, a member of a local school or of a social club, you don't have any rights within that organization. You can't tell them how to run it. Is that true? I mean, if you're not a member, you can't tell them how to run it. My house, my rules, or something like that applies. Even in this church, if you're not a member, you don't have the right to vote. You can express your opinion, there's no problem with that. But as far as voting and deciding policy, that's reserved for membership. And the ultimate membership, which is closed, if you remember the story of the ark, God closed the door to the ark after Noah and his family were in. 8 people. Door closes, waters rose, everyone else is not a member. I look for the day that the enemies of God will be defeated just as certainly as they were, as that giant was, by a little guy called David. 1 Samuel, if you will. 1 Samuel 17, I think it's coming up. Yeah, here we go. It's on screen. 45 through 47. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know. Why is God doing this? So that all the earth can know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So David stood, a young boy, they say, very young man, and stood to defend the honor of the God that he served, that we serve. And he stood there and said, the battle's not ours. The Lord will give you into our hands. Just as in Chronicles, we were to stand, they were to stand, and see the salvation of our God. And we are still to do that. Yes, there's still problems with the election. And I promised I wouldn't go on a rant about the election. There are still problems with the counting in the election. And I think those things will be addressed. I pray they will. I do believe God is in control, and that's where I rest. So there are times where I go, oh, how can they do that? Well, because they're evil. And so I have to rest, and I encourage you to rest in the fact that God is still in control, and things will be adjusted. Brave men and women throughout the years have fought to maintain our independence and to protect the liberties granted to us by God. And now it's our turn to defend those liberties against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There are enemies within as well. Khrushchev said, when I was still a young man in high school, Khrushchev said the words that we won't have to fire a shot to take over your nation. Give us 2 generations and we'll own you. He's close. They're trying. What's her name? Ocasio-Cortez? Openly socialistic. The woman taking over for Georgia, openly socialistic. Bernie Sanders, openly socialistic. Communist. Sorry? College professors, yeah. We got to stand, church. Pray, fight, through the ballot, and through prayer. Trust God. Amen?